Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. 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 Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. 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 Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a planning. Can't nobody stop us. 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 Can't nobody stop us.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Unmasking AI book talk. I'm Karen Howe. I'm a journalist who covers artificial intelligence, and I'm so thrilled to be speaking today with Dr. Joy Buolamwini about her new book, Unmasking AI, My Mission to Protect What is Human in a World of Machines, which came out on Halloween. Dr. Joy is a poet of code who uses art and research to illuminate the social implications and potential harms of artificial intelligence. In 2016, she founded the Algorithmic Justice League with a mission to create a world with more equitable and accountable technology. You have very likely seen her work. Her TED featured talk on algorithmic bias has over 1.6 million views. Fortune magazine named her to their list of the world's greatest leaders, describing her as the conscience of the AI revolution. She advises world leaders on preventing AI harms, and she earned her PhD and master's degree from MIT, her master's of science from Oxford University with distinction, and a bachelor's in computer science from Georgia Institute of Technology. Dr. Joy, I have closely followed so much of your work over the years, and I was really touched to read your book earlier this month. Can you tell us a little bit more about your book and what was the motivation for writing it?
Oh, well, thank you so much for being part of our first virtual event. You are one of the tech journalists that I admire most. And so this is really a true honor for me to have you join me in this book talk. So I wrote the book because at the present, we are seeing AI in the headlines and so forth, but so often everyday people don't feel like they're part of the conversation. So if you don't have all those degrees that you just mentioned, or you're not a policy person, I really wanted to have a book where you could learn, what is AI? How can it be harmful? How can we prevent those harms so we can actually realize the potential of these types of technologies, not just for the privileged few, but for everybody. And also, there's a part of it where I wanted to take people a bit behind the curtain, right? What was it like to be a graduate student at MIT at this time in the development of AI, doing research that was challenging our perception of some of the most powerful companies in the world, and also a bit about the doubts and the trepidation that I had for doing this work, because I'm very much a tech geek and optimist, and I was enamored by the world of technology. And I was warned that if I was going to talk about racism and sexism, it might make my career very small. That didn't exactly happen, right? But to actually go through that whole process. And so I truly hope that when people read the book, they know that if they have a face, they have a place in the conversation about AI, because these are technologies that are shaping all of our lives.
That was definitely my favorite part of the book was the intimate behind the scenes moments. And I really felt like you were creating kind of this roadmap for change makers, showing them how this is done. And I personally learned so much from being in the room with you in these critical moments when you were having these doubts or when you were having these successes. So I really loved that experience. You mentioned the Algorithmic Justice League, and for people who are new to you and to your work at AJL, let's play the sizzle reel.
Let's play it. During my first semester at MIT, I got computer vision software that was supposed to track my face. It didn't work until I put on this white mask. I'm thinking, all right, what's going on here? Is it the lighting conditions? Is it the angle at which I'm looking at the camera, or is there something more? That's when I started looking into issues of bias that can creep into technology.
Researchers like Buolamwini have repeatedly found that certain groups tend to get excluded from the data.
It was less accurate on darker-skinned individuals than lighter-skinned individuals.
These are situations that are currently happening on the ground.
If it happened to me, it could happen to you.
Algorithmic bias, like human bias, results in unfairness. However, algorithms like viruses can spread bias on a massive scale. Who audits the auditors? Recommendations from a field scan of the algorithmic auditing ecosystem. This work was done in collaboration with Dr. Sasha Costanza-Chalk, Deb Raji, and many more. Actually, today, the Algorithmic Justice League, we launched a TSA checkpoint scorecard. I am actually hopeful after this roundtable with President Biden, because we started the conversation really focused not just on what AI can do, which we've heard a lot about, but centering how it's impacting real people. Well, clearly we've been busy, and I want to just take a moment to really express so much gratitude for the many champions and supporters that we've had throughout the years. And I especially want to give thanks to the Ford Foundation. They were our first supporters, first funders of AJL. They even helped fund AI Ain't I, a Woman, which is a spoken word algorithmic audit, and really believed in this vision of putting storytelling, art, and research together, which is at the heart of AJL. So I couldn't be more thrilled to have Darren Walker, president of Ford Foundation, share these remarks with you.
Hello, this is Darren Walker from the Ford Foundation, and I'm delighted to be with you on this occasion to talk about an organization that is among the most important in our country working for justice, the Algorithmic Justice League. AJL is an organization that is more vitally needed than ever at a time when basic dignity and human rights and racial justice are contested. We need institutions like AJL, and we need leaders like Joy Buolamwini, whose bravery, courage, tenacity, and unwavering commitment to the ideal of justice for all inspires me. Thank you, Joy, for creating this book, Unmasking AI, which helps us to understand the opportunities and the risks in this new digital world. We are grateful at the Ford Foundation for our enduring partnership and look forward to many more years of supporting both you as a leader and AJL as a vital part of the ecosystem of civil society organizations advancing justice in America and in the world. Thank you.
Okay, now for the best part, let's dig into the book. As I mentioned earlier, I was really touched by the book. You mentioned in the book that you're a private person, but then you write with so much courage and so much vulnerability about your experience. And even though I've heard your story and I've watched your TED Talk and part of your journey many times about how you came to do this work, what I didn't actually know was the struggle that you initially felt when you were deciding whether or not to even take on this work. And I really appreciate your honesty in this part of the book where you said that you grappled with, you didn't want to be shoehorned into this kind of work. You didn't want to be seen as a gadfly. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and where you ultimately found the clarity and the courage to step into these shoes?
Now, that's such a great question. Yes, before you see what you see today, there was a lot of doubt. And part of the reason I didn't know if I wanted to take on this work was a lot of people around me warned me that if I did research that focused on bias, racial bias, gender bias, that kind of thing, it could really limit my career options within computer science. And the other part was also personally, I am a tech geek and optimist. I got into computer science because I didn't want to deal with the messiness of people. I was like, math, yay, abstract spaces, wonderful, you know? And so it was a bit jarring to me that the space I thought could be an escape, I realized, oh, society is reflected in everything, including our technology. And so I was a bit reluctant because my personality, as you know, is a bit jokey and goofy, and this is very serious work. So I also wasn't sure if I fit the bill for that. Ultimately, what made me decide to do this work, and you'll see in the book, was meeting others who were on a similar journey, like Kathy O'Neill. Reading Weapons of Math Destruction made me realize, okay, if I'm gonna be a gadfly, there might be some other people out here, so I'm not gonna be on my own doing it. And then also various elections, etc., was happening where we were in the world. Georgetown Law had released a report showing police were starting to adopt facial recognition technologies. So I felt, wait a second, I'm at this place, the MIT Media Lab, which is a huge platform. I've developed certain skills, and as reluctant as I've been to talk about these issues, maybe this is the opportunity to say something. So you do see that struggle through the book, because it's very much saying, okay, I'm going to critique the space that I very much was enamored by, and that's not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned an interesting point, which is that you felt sort of a responsibility because you were at the MIT Media Lab and you have this platform, you have the privilege. But one of the recurring observations that you make through the book is also how you often sat at the intersection and still sit at the intersection of privilege and oppression. And you were at MIT, but you were also a young researcher. You're a young Black woman researcher. You're critiquing big tech when MIT is actually supported by big tech. And there were so many moments of color in your book that I really loved, where you kind of illustrated this as well. Like you talk about this one moment when you were invited to an event convened by the vice president of the European Commission. And then when you arrived, the guard wouldn't even let you in. So could you talk a little bit about those power dynamics, this intersection of privilege and oppression? And do you see a parallel between these moments that you experience in your professional life and also the challenges that you see in AI technology development?
Yes, it actually reminds me of the notion of being an outsider within. And so throughout the book, right, I talk about my experiences even before some of what you're sharing, right? What was it like to be a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford? I'm out of my element, you know? And
Yeah.
I feel that part of my own journey is understanding that my inclusion in privileged spaces is often the exception, and that makes me more aware of thinking, how do we invite more people into the conversation so we can pull up more chairs, right? And I really appreciate some of the mentors in my life because they've pulled me in to spaces. So even when we're talking about the EU Global Tech panel, I was there because of Megan Smith. She looked around the panel and she said, we need more youthful voices here. And so understanding that in some places I can also be the gate opener as well as critiquing the gatekeepers. The other thing is some of my earlier critiques of administration, MIT administration, or others, as I gained more experience building and running my own organization, I had a deeper appreciation for some of the challenges they were dealing with. So for me as not just as an undergrad, but also as a grad student at MIT, and I'm critiquing these tech companies, as I come to learn how much they fund so much of AI research, it made sense to me, right? Why researchers or more senior scholars would be really cautious in their critiques, because if that means they don't get funding for their lab or they don't get funding for their students, you know, it
Yeah.
made more sense as I came to have greater awareness. at the same time, I still thought it was important to speak up, and I really admire people like, Dr. Timnit Gebru, Dr. Meg Mitchell as well, because speaking up, as I was warned, did have its consequences, but I do think it was worth it. I do think what's important is to be aware of those power dynamics so you're not caught off guard and you can be prepared, for some of the pushback and some of the navigation that's required. And you see me in the book navigating it in different ways, some more successful than others.
I think preparation was also a really big theme in your book. One of the things I also found very honest was this reflection how there were so many opportunities that were starting to come your way after people really started realizing how important the things you were talking about were. And oftentimes you felt like, oh my God, am I moving too fast and getting these opportunities that maybe I'm not ready for? But then you always prepared so rigorously. So then when the moment hit, you were able to seize that moment. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how you actually go about preparing for events that you have potentially never partaken in, and in settings where you are sort of a beginner among potentially a very old guard.
Yes, sometimes ignorance is good. So I didn't realize exactly what I was getting myself into when I would say yes to certain things. So congressional testimonies, that sounds great, right? Wait, I gotta do a written one and then speak, and then what? So part of it was not exactly knowing what I was getting myself into. So that probably helped. But once I had a full awareness of what I had agreed to, then I would go into hyper over. I don't even know if it's over prepared. I prefer to study up and to feel that I have everything I need at hand to address the moment. So it could be hours of preparation, it could be days of preparation. But even when I used to do my early talks, I would probably practice the talk 10 times, and it might be a 45-minute talk, right? Or when I was memorizing AI Ain't I a Woman, I remember my roommate at the time be brushing my teeth. My heart smiles as I bask in their legacies, just always practicing. And then some of my friends would make fun of me because I remember visiting some friends in Oxford, and they had their son at the time. And we're in the playground, and I'm getting ready for some keynote in, I think it was in Germany at the time, right? So I'm on the swings, and I'm just like acting like the swing is the audience and so forth with what I want to say and that kind of thing. So I play pretend a lot. And then when you get to the space, you're like, oh, this is a little bigger than I imagined, but let's go. Let's go. So I and I think the other part of the extra preparation is also the sense of being a young woman in tech. I'm
Yeah.
young now. I was even younger then with some of the opportunities that I describe, right? Having that pressure of representing not just myself, but others who look like me, and not wanting to mess up so that they also have opportunities in the future. So that was a big part of it as well.
We're sort of in a very different time with AI now than when you first started your work in algorithmic justice. So, how do you feel like the themes that you started observing just with your white mask and the computer vision system are now applying to generative AI systems today?
It's so interesting to see how relevant that work remains. And one example is Bloomberg News. They did this investigative evaluation of Stable Diffusion, the text to image generative AI model. And they actually used the gender shades methodology, right, of doing the skin types, of even showing average faces. So they showed average faces for prompts of high paying jobs and low paying jobs. Not so surprisingly, high paying jobs were overrepresented by lighter skinned men. Low paying jobs were overrepresented by people of color, and criminal stereotypes. So, inmate, terrorist, drug dealer. Those were, I was like, oh, we do have diversity in tech, right? Overrepresented by men of color. So to see
Yeah.
that methodology being used to interrogate existing generative AI systems was a reminder to me of the relevance of this work. And so I do think so much of what we've been saying since 2016 and scholars before, my time as well. I think of the work of Dr. Sophia Nobles with Algorithms of Oppression, or I think of Dr. Latanya Sweeney and some of the early work she did looking at search engine bias on certain names. All of these foundations have been laid that inform the conversation we're having now. And so the main difference I see is people's eyes don't glaze over when I say AI, right? Because there was a time I felt like I was in the corner with Tim Need and Kathy, and they got what I was saying. And everybody else was kind of like, what is she on about? Okay. That kind of thing, which is why, the film coded bias and other pieces were helpful. But I do think now, because more people are familiar with AI tools, the conversation has become mainstream in a way it wasn't when we first started out.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's so true that there's been so much consistency in sort of the themes that you observed and brought forward with your research to today in a way that's sometimes actually a little bit disheartening. Like people will tell me when reading my stories, like, what has actually changed? You've been researching this subject for a long time. I've been writing about it for a long time. And sometimes it just feels like we're just repeating the same cycle over and over and over again. But one of the examples that I always bring up as like, this is the hope for optimism, is the fact that your work with gender shades ultimately led to so much policy change. And it actually created this movement that really did actually do something. It did actually change something. So I'm wondering if you could actually share a little bit for the audience members that might not know this part of your story, how you went from having gender shades as a research paper to ultimately creating this movement and passing policies and actually even ending up in a room with the President of the United States advising him about what he should do.
That escalated quickly, white mask to presidential roundtable. What I love about the opportunity of writing the book was showing how change happens, right? So Gender Shades comes out, and at first I'm talking to researchers because it was important that research agendas change. And now you have whole research fields and academic conferences that focus on fairness, accountability, transparency in machine learning and AI. That's huge. At the time I was doing the work, it wasn't even clear where I could publish my research. Those spaces were just opening. And so I think it's easy to take it for granted that this research happens. At that time, if people were looking at issues with tech companies, they normally wouldn't name the companies. Naming and changing is so important to the work that we do at the Algorithmic Justice League. And so there was that aspect of what questions are we asking in academia? And the research was showing that the ways in which we measured progress within our community was actually giving us a false sense of progress. So that by itself was already big. Then we go and we talk to the companies, right? The deployers of these systems. After R&D, you're putting the tech out there. And we found that some truly had not tested the systems, so they did not know some of these issues were happening. But we also had bias in the wild stories where people were saying, oh, we knew this was a problem, but it would have been harder for my job if we had to address it. So it became an interesting kind of outsider helping the insiders. So to have the New York Times do a front page business feature of that research meant that people on the inside could now point to outside pressure to push for what they wanted to see changed. And we saw, for example, Google doesn't do gendered labels with some of their APIs anymore. Microsoft, IBM, Amazon, they all don't sell their systems to law enforcement anymore when it comes to facial recognition capabilities after our research and also the advocacy of so many people within the tech justice ecosystem. I live in Cambridge. It's probably no surprise that Cambridge, Brookline, Boston all have restrictions on police use of facial recognition technologies, and even the language within legislation changed, right? Where it wasn't just that you had to audit, you had to audit by yes race, yes gender, but phenotype, skin type. That we were being very explicit about skin type is something that changed the conversation that wasn't there before, and their intersectionality. And so these sorts of changes we saw, and I know we did a Gender Shades 5-year anniversary where we were going through, I think it was over 100 different pieces of legislation, right? Where we could see how the language had shifted or evolved. The research itself has been cited over 4,000 times. There were tens of thousands of articles around it when it came out. And I share these numbers to say it made a difference for people to see MIT-backed research, peer-reviewed research showing these disparities from some of the largest tech companies, because it meant you could not dismiss these findings and actions had to be taken. So then we go into the policy space, right? Some of those actions meant holding congressional hearings. From those congressional hearings, we had a commitment from the US government to actually have a baseline of where facial recognition technologies are being used. The GAO, Government Accountability Office, has done that work, which then makes it easier for organizers and resistance groups to say, okay, this is where it's being used, we can strategize. So that was the other part that was fun for me, because as a technologist, I was like, I don't know if law is going to make a difference. I don't know about policy. I was not convinced at the beginning. I thought, okay, the technologists are going to fix this. We built it. We know how it works. Like, we're the ones. And then as I was going through, I was like, oh, we are not equipped, not ready. Let me go learn from the ACLU of Massachusetts. So we did the Press Pause campaign together. Let me go sit at the feet of real organizers who've been doing this type of work for decades, because we have so much more to learn, And what has been interesting was then seeing AJL's role with providing empirical evidence for other groups. And so they're doing what they do well with the advocacy side. And then we're adding a little bit more ammunition by saying, what they said, here's all the research that backs it up, right? And so that, I think, that part for me was also very helpful, because at some point I did become disillusioned with the academy. And so to be able to work with organizations on the front lines and remind myself why I was doing the work. And yes, it mattered, not because it got all of this coverage or I got, research credits, etc., but because real people could use it in their actual lives to prevent harmful AI deployments. And so that's why I'm very optimistic, because I've seen that the change is possible. Is it as fast as we want it to be? Is it happening everywhere? Not yet, but that's why we continue to do the work.
Yeah, that's awesome. And such a huge part of the what I learned from the book as well was just the amount of coalition building that happened, and the way that you really created communities around this work so that there was more momentum to move forward. I wanted to ask also about this. There's a part of the book where you talk about how the heavy weight of the responsibility actually started taking a toll on your health, and you struggled to prioritize your health with all of the responsibilities. And then you ended up making the decision to step back, which was a really, for me, it was like one of the parts that resonated with me most, because this is hard work. And in the moment that we're in now, AI has become, the space has become more overwhelming than ever before. And this is something that I hear so many other people within the space really, really struggle with. So I'm curious, like, how did you ultimately make that step to give yourself permission to take a step back? And how are you continuing to do that now that there's sort of more work to be done than ever before?
Yes, I wish I could take credit. My body said no. Because my mind was ready to go like, but all this stuff is happening and we can help, which is true. But if you don't have yourself, you know how sometimes people will say health is wealth and all of that jazz. Health is greater than wealth. Like if you don't have you for yourself, for the people who love you, then what's the point? And I know me saying this and looking at my history, you did read that intro. I'm not the poster child for work-life balance, I realize, right? Why did I take a step back? Because I got really sick. And I got so sick that I realized that if I keep doing this to myself, right, there are gonna be some very serious consequences for me in the long term and the short term. And so, but my body said no, and I listened. But it was really hard because there was so much momentum, and even it's I'm like the person who's still sending emails while I should be sleeping, that kind of thing. What do I do now? Even recently, I had to say, oh, I needed to take a step back. For example, few weeks ago, I was meant to do TED AI and I was doing too much again. So I was there in San Francisco, ready to go, slides, etc. But I had learned by that time to listen to the warning signs from my body. So I think a younger
Yeah.
version of me would have just pushed through and done
Yeah.
it because I've done that so many times before. And it has a cost, even if you don't see it in that moment. And so there was applying some of the lessons that as much as I'd love to do this, I need to listen to my body and it's better if I rest. And so then I canceled a few more things. And I was like, all right, what are the things that I really, really want to do so that I'm not saying yes to so many nice to haves? And it's a discipline when so many people are genuinely wanting to engage you or your organization and you genuinely want to help. It took a long time for me to be okay saying no and disappointing people and realizing that it's better to disappoint people than to disappoint my body. So it's an
So,
ongoing lesson.
so true. I wanted to turn to a bit of a meta question about your book writing process and the audiobook that you recorded. So, you had a very interesting experience with your audiobook. Would you like to share a little bit about that, the journey that you had and the reflection that you had?
Oh yes, so I the book has been fun. Do you know I have a jacket credit, right, for helping design. So I wrote the book, I helped design the book, but we had an amazing award-winning illustrator, Malika Favre, who did this great cover. You might know her from her New Yorker covers, etc. So wrote the book, helped with the jacket design, and then I recorded the audiobook. So this is not helping on the you should slow down side of things, I realize. So I was excited about the audiobook, but had a lot of things to do. So I'm like, maybe an AI voice clone, an ethically created AI voice clone could help me out here, right? Because there are things to do, not enough time. But we had a studio for 3.5 days, and I was so fortunate to work with Tavia Gilbert. She has done 500 audiobooks and it shows. So she was the director. I was the rookie on the team, did not know what I was getting myself into. I was like, how hard is reading out loud? This is not reading out loud. This is not popcorn in middle school. This is voice acting. So you're putting so much energy to convey what you meant for each part of the text. You have to pace it just right. And also, what I appreciated with the director, she would keep me emotionally honest. So I would read through like a really intense scene, like it didn't bother me. And she's like, no, 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 how did you feel? Or there's a part where I'm talking about insults that people were giving to me when I shared my TED talk. And I kept messing up saying it because it's hard to read insults about yourself, right? So I was like, so can you repeat that part again? And I'm like, no. Okay, fine. But it's an insult. I don't want to keep repeating insults to myself. Anyways, that whole process, it just showed me how much I underestimated the profession of voice acting because I was pretty ignorant to it. And by the time we got through, I believe the audiobook is over 9 hours, right? I and I saw the AI capabilities. I really could not see AI bringing in that emotional honesty and authenticity to an
Mhm.
author reading their experience in the way they experienced it for the reader. And so that was actually a good reminder to me for how easy it is to assume something you're not as familiar with can be automated. And then when you actually get into it, you realize, oh, there might be some steps I didn't even know about.
Well, I'm so glad that you end up reading your audiobook because one of my favorite things is listening to the original author read their audiobook so that I can fully understand what they actually intended for each section. So we have a few audience questions, but before we get to that, is there anything else that you would like to talk about?
Oh yes, this is actually what I wanted to talk about with the TED AI talk, where I listened to my body and I said, "Okay, not today, not today." But it is around this notion of algorithmic redress. And so, oftentimes, when we hear conversations about ethical AI, responsible AI, and so forth, there's a conversation of what we can do to prevent AI harms or build better models, better auditing approaches, and so forth. But we also have to keep in mind we're not going to get it right all the time. So, what happens for the people who are harmed by AI systems, who I like to call the excoded? And so, this notion of redress comes into play. That's part of also why we've built out our excoded experiences platform with AJL. So, coming to this notion, one way of thinking about redress is what do we do with existing AI models that have been trained on data taken without permission on consent, and especially
Mhm.
copyrighted data, because some people
Mhm.
make an argument, oh, it's for the commons, etc., and so forth. Okay, let's put that aside because that's its own conversation. This one said copyright. What's the reason now? We're playing it out in the courts. So my thought here is redress can also look like going back to models that were trained with stolen data or uncompensated data, or you can say contested data. So you delete the data, but the data isn't enough, right? Because you can train a model and then delete the data. This is what Facebook did. Facebook deleted 1 billion face prints after there was a lawsuit and a settlement, et cetera, about their use of people's face images, right? But they kept the models that they had created with it. So I think you also need to delete the models if they were created with data gotten in unethical ways. Then there's another part. It's not just deleting the models. Now you have to reconfigure the products that were built on top of those models. So this is
Mhm.
something I've been thinking about as deep data deletion, hence D3, but also
Mhm.
those 3 steps of deleting the data, deleting the models, and deleting the product integration. So I do think that should be part of redress. And yes, people will say, well, it cost us $100 million to train the system XYZ, which is why you should train it ethically to begin with. So there should be high penalties instead of free passes, if the models are done in illegal ways or lawful yet awful ways.
I think that's such an important point that the way that we're currently, I don't think we're having enough of a conversation yet about how to actually get redress, how to actually make sure that people's data is protected and fully private. So I really love that concept, D3. So we now have some questions from your beloved fans who would like to hear from you. They posted some questions on social media. So I'll start with the first one. An Instagram user asked, what would your ideal and fun implementation of AI be?
Ooh, such a great question. So, as a creative, my ideal implementation of AI is what I was trying to do as a student at the Media Lab. I was taking this class, science fabrication, build some cool stuff. So, I wanted a mirror. You look into the mirror, say, hello, beautiful, or hello, handsome, or hello, however you want to be identified, right? And you could then transform into anything you wanted in the mirror. And that's when I put on that camera, added some face tracking, and as the cover of the book tells you, ended up coding in a white mask to try to make that sort of thing happen. But I do think what excites me is when we create ethical tools that let people explore their creativity, but also understanding even in those creative spaces if we haven't done the work of really checking the systems for the potential harms and biases and putting steps to mitigate it, what is meant to be a fun experience can actually end up causing harm. I think about using a social robot that I really like to play with, and they had put in a face recognition system, right? Face detection to be more specific. And one of the apps that they had loaded there was supposed to say how many faces were in a photo that was taken on the robot. So I was there with my lab group, etc. And then they took the photos. They were lighter skinned, da da da. It's like, oh, two faces, three faces. Then I went in, took a photo of my face. Robot tells me zero faces. Right. We I don't put this example in the book, but we've seen this kind of thing before,
Yeah.
and so I do think that even when people are doing their best to create tools that are meant to be fun and exciting, we all of the conversations around power shadows and algorithmic bias and AI harms especially apply there.
Absolutely. Our next question is from Greta from LinkedIn. Greta says, hi, Dr. Joy. I'm an educator in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I've loved sharing your work and videos with students in my technology classes. What advice would you share with young people who are excited about possibly working in the field of AI, but may struggle to see how much of a difference they can make in terms of making the technology more just? What sustains you personally in your algorithmic justice work?
Woo, woo, these some deep questions. One, I would say we need you. We certainly need diverse perspectives and diverse voices. I'm not sure where we would be on the conversation with facial recognition technologies had Debraji, Timney, myself, all young women of color really put ourselves out there, right, to say this is what our research is showing. And so I think it's important to understand that your perspectives matter. And even some of the things I was looking at, if I talk to other folks, they're like, we've been known this tech doesn't work. Like, why are you getting awards? I was like, I know. I just put the empirical evidence behind it, right? And a few other things. But I do think it's important to understand that your story matters. And the biggest lesson I learned, and I try to share this in the book, is how I kept pushing to do this work, even when the voices around me were saying that I might not make much of a difference or much of an impact other than hurting myself, you know? And so I do think it's important to share your experiences and to pursue the things that matter to you and your communities. So that's part of what I would encourage people to do. And then I think that this was one of those multi-part questions. So there were other parts to this question. What gives me hope, I think, was one of them.
Yeah.
Okay. I remember it was like a year or two ago. I was like, I don't know about AJ. Yeah, there's a lot happening, and I'd start modeling and other jazz. I'm like, maybe I do other things. And then this young, and when I say young person, I want to say Aurora was seven at the time. And she had watched Coded Bias 3 times, more than my dad. And she had, maybe not now, but at the time. And then she was doing a school project where they were doing living wax museum. And so she decided to be me. And she had her red blazer, she had her white glasses,
So
and she
cute.
had her speech. I'm Dr. Joy, and I have, in her words, a bunch of degrees. And she went into it, but just seeing how excited she was and wanting to build, something good and meaningful for the world at 7, I was like, oh, I can't stop now, right? So I will say, seeing what's at stake and that we can create a different type of world for ourselves and generations to come keeps me going.
Such a good point. Okay, we have another question from another Instagram user who asks, hello, Dr. Joy. Could you share your insight on why a significant number of individuals remain unaware and unengaged with the issues of unfair practices in the realm of artificial intelligence?
I think there are several parts to this, and part of why AJL's work, we focus on raising awareness, is what are the stories that get the most news coverage, right? And who also gets the most coverage. And many of the voices that talk about the harms of AI generally aren't the voices that are centered, right? Especially when we're talking about immediate harms on marginalized communities, or harms that can eventually impact everyone. No one's immune to AI bias. So I think, one, it's a bit of where media attention goes, which is why I appreciate reporters like Karen saying, in these spaces that I'm in, I'm going to push for these stories. And there are whole hierarchies that decide which headlines make it and so forth. And so I think that's part of it. Another part that I've seen, and I've kind of heard this notion that people aren't engaged. My experience has been, once people know what's at stake, they're very engaged. Like, wait, what? The IRS is doing what with facial recognition?
Yeah.
Wait. This mortgage that got denied was due to an AI system. So I really do think part of the engagement piece is showing how specific AI systems govern access to opportunity, and showing both the individual harms and the societal harms. But I have so much faith and hope in people. Just even the folks who reach out to AJL, they're like, send me as tribute, I volunteer. So my hope also with the book is, the other piece of it is feeling like this isn't really a conversation for you if you aren't in the tech world, if you're not in the policy world. Where do you belong? And I take a lot of inspiration from the Brooklyn tenants. They were organizing amongst themselves, they were finding resources to educate themselves. They pointed to some of the resources from AJL as being helpful, because they said this was language we could understand, and language that was accessible to our communities. And so I think there is a duty for those of us within the tech world to make what is happening more accessible as well. And so my hope with Unmasking AI is that it does bring you in past the tech jargon, etc. Because you don't have to know what a neural net is. You don't have to know all the different types of biometric technologies to know if something's unfair, to know if you've been harmed. And I do think those are conversations we can all engage with. So I think researchers can do more in making their work accessible. I definitely think we have journalists and media platforms that can be thoughtful about the various voices and perspectives that are given a platform as well.
100%. Everyone can be and should be involved in AI. I think that's such an important message. We have our last audience question. This one is from X, formerly known as Twitter. And AIX Bio asks, Dr. Joy, what are your thoughts on the concept of regulatory capture? How strict regulation and high entry barriers might favor large corporations, potentially disadvantaging smaller businesses and stifling innovation?
Ooh, this is such a great question. So, this notion of regulatory capture, right? We're at a moment. When we first started this work and we were talking about policy, there was a lot of talk about self-regulation. We got this. We know there are problems. We'll work on it. We'll work on it. We even have an AI ethics team, right? People are out here making moves. We got this. The industry's immune system will respond, and other such things, right? At this point, with where we are with generative AI, we're hearing a different thing. Regulate me. We want to be regulated. These technologies are powerful. We should not be operating without guardrails. So that all sounds good. But then the question is, who's actually writing those regulations and who has influence on those regulations? And this is where the regulatory capture can happen when you have powerful companies, right? Who have lobbyists, who can go to the policymakers, and also who have enough money where they can fund fellows who then have staff positions within the offices of policymakers, are either writing the legislation or have a shadow pen. Because what happens is, while the profit interest is centered, the public interest gets marginalized. And that's the problem with regulatory capture. So I don't expect the private sector to do what's best for the public benefit. That is not necessarily their aim or their goal. That is the whole point, right, of what we have lawmakers and policy makers for. So I do think it's important to have the people developing the AI systems as part of the conversation, absolutely. But we have to be really mindful that they are not leading the conversation of saying, here are the ways we would prefer to be regulated. And I think part of what I hear so often that doesn't necessarily ring true is, if don't regulate us too much because it might stifle innovation, as though those things have to be at odds. They don't need to be at odds, right? We can create things more responsibly, and that requires even more innovation. So I was at a UN event where Professor Virginia Dingnam, she said, right now, when you're thinking about AI and innovation, it's like driving a car that hasn't had any safety checks with a driver without a license on unpaved roads, right? Where there aren't even traffic lights. And then we're saying, don't stifle innovation. No. We're saying we should probably have some infrastructure so people don't get hurt, right? They don't have to be at odds. Vehicles still exist. Vehicles are safer now. And yes, when those vehicles were coming out, those companies pushed back on the safety requirements.
It's a very good point. It's really true that regulation can actually foster innovation, not actually stifle it. I have one more question for you. You had an opportunity to meet with President Biden, and he asked you at the time, what should I do? And you were able to advise him on that from all of the research and the work that you had done. So I wanted to turn the question on you and ask, what should we all do? What should everyone that's watching this book talk and everyone that ends up reading your book, what should they be doing to contribute to the future that we live in with AI?
Oh, just ending on all the big questions, right? I think one thing is to understand the importance of your voice. So ask what AI systems are being used and make sure that you have a choice. So one simple thing that I do is when I go and I'm traveling, right? I always opt out of facial recognition technologies to show that it is possible, because I'm a a US citizen. Not everybody has that option. But I do think asking questions and not just assuming that because something is provided, it is the only option is something we can all do. So if you're a parent, if you're in schools, right, and AI systems are being adopted for e-proctoring, are there alternatives? Right? Why are we adopting this? Other questions you can ask in your workplace and so forth is what AI systems are being used, right? People should know. And then you can also ask, have they been tested for bias or harms? I think these are questions we can all be asking in the various spaces that we're in. And then at AJL, we always welcome people to share their stories. So if you've seen something or you have a good story of triumph, report.ajl.org, right? Because then we can connect you with others who might have had similar experiences, or we can say, oh, here's an emerging area of harm or opportunity that we hadn't considered before that we can amplify. So my biggest thing would be ask questions and don't feel like you have to accept the defaults.
Amazing advice. Dr. Joy, if people want to learn more about your work and about the themes of your book, what resources would you recommend?
Go to ajl.org, Algorithmic Justice League. We have a whole library, lots of frequently asked questions, etc. So the whole point is, again, inviting more people into the conversation. And the book is at Unmasking .ai. Also with AJL, you can follow us at AJL United on all of the various social media, and then TikTok. We out here on TikTok. Okay, we're at AJL org as well. So yes, check us out.
All right. So now I understand that you have something special for the audience.
Yes. So everybody who signed up was put into a raffle, and the raffle was to receive a signed copy of Unmasking
Woo!
AI. And so the only problem is I can't find my pen. I've become very digital recently. And so once I find a pen, the person who I believe they are putting on screen now will receive a personalized, signed version of the book. And it's actually one of the first copies I myself received. So it's a very special edition of the book. So yes, as soon as I find a pen, and I'm sure there's a pen here somewhere, I can't even find my Apple Pencil, so I gotta work on this.
And so for the rest of your audience, where can they find your book?
Yes, unmasking.ai, and also we have the tour coming. So this is the virtual stop, one of 3 virtual stops on the tour. But if you do unmasking.ai/tour, there are 11 stops. So New York, virtual, DC, Chicago, San Francisco, Santa Cruz, LA, and I might be missing others, right? On various spots you can do. And also, we recommend if you're not able to do any of the in-person ones, you might want to do a watch party of a virtual one like this one. And so hopefully in the next round, I can hit up more cities and also do more talks internationally. But that whole conversation about taking care of your body, I had to realize I could only do so much. But I think
You cannot clone yourself just yet.
No, not well, not well. It has been tried with various AI approaches. Not quite human.
Well, thank you so much for being in conversation with me today and for asking me to host this wonderful book event. It has been an honor, and thank you to all of the people that showed up and came and are continuing to support the work that you do, that everyone needs to be doing to make sure that we have a better future with AI.
Thank you so much. It has been a wonderful conversation with you. I'm glad to see that you enjoyed reading the book just from what you were talking about, and the questions you asked made me feel like this was worth the 3-year effort, to make the book happen. I do want to close as I usually close, which is as a poet of code with a poem. And this is actually one of a number of poems in the book. And this one is for the encoded, those who have been harmed by AI systems. And it's inspired by the successful resistance efforts of the Brooklyn tenants as well. So I will now share the poem for the encoded. To the encoded and vital voices, resisting and revealing the lie that we must accept the surrender of our faces, the harvesting of our data, the plunder of our traces. We celebrate your courage. No silence, no consent. You show the path to algorithmic justice requires a league, a sisterhood, a neighborhood, hallway gatherings, Sharpies and posters, coalitions, petitions, testimonies, letters, book tours, research and potlucks, dancing and music, everyone playing a role to orchestrate change. To the Brooklyn tenants and freedom fighters around the world, persisting and prevailing against algorithms of oppression, automating inequality through weapons of mass destruction, we stand with you in gratitude. You demonstrate the people have a voice and a choice. When defiant melodies harmonize to elevate human life, dignity, and rights, the victory is ours. Thank you.
Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a plan and can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a plan and can't nobody stop us. Everyone turn on your facial recognition block. We're here to make a plan